Good morning to you. Senior ministers will meet today to finalise plans for the next stage of lockdown in England, with it now all but certain that the easing of restrictions on the 21st of June will be set back. Boris Johnson has admitted he's less optimistic about further reopening as he holds final talks with members of his cabinet before addressing the nation tomorrow. Now, it's reported the easing of controls could be delayed by about 4 weeks, so that would allow more people to get a second dose of vaccine as cases of the Delta variant continue to rise. But as Ashna Hurinag reports, it's bad news for business, hoping to fully reopen soon.
There have been next to no laughs at this comedy club in Kingston for 18 months. With only room for 60, it's intimate venues like this, relying on the country breaking free from restrictions.
It doesn't exist if we can't have people come into a space and be together. But of course, we want people to do it safely. I'm not advocating anything that would be unsafe, but we don't exist if we can't be performing in this. Because we never know what's going to happen until right before, then we have to go, okay, well, what are they going to throw at us this time? Is it going to be 1 meter? Is it going to be 1.5 meters distance? What's the mask rule? Not having any guidance in advance is crucial to making a good decision that's safe for us and safe for our customers.
This frustration the Prime Minister will likely face from thousands of businesses, especially as promises of so-called Freedom Day in England are being scaled back.
It's clear that the cases are going up, and that the levels of hospitalisation are going up. Clearly, it's a matter of serious concern. Now,
less optimistic, aren't you, from where you were at the end of May? That's fair, isn't it?
Yes, that's certainly fair.
But this won't necessarily mean returning to lockdown. Scientists are unlikely to suggest that restrictions should be tightened further, but there are signs that some rules will be here to stay, things like face masks and guidance on working from home. In order to make the roadmap irreversible, the answer may be more jabs in arms. The double vaccinated are far better protected, but just over half of adults in the UK have had both doses. A few weeks' delay buys more time.
If there is a delay, I think the majority of people are actually already wanting it to happen, and the data suggests that quite clearly. I think the danger is that the government acts a bit like a parent who thinks that the public aren't capable of dealing with the truth and can't be told the full information. Don't treat the public as fools, and don't treat the public as a problem. Treat the public as a partner.
Tomorrow is decision day, but it's likely June the 21st will be a summer solstice that may feel far from celebratory. Ashna Hurinag, Sky News.
Sir David Attenborough will today tell G7 leaders they face some of the most important decisions in human history. It comes on the final day of the summit in Cornwall as the group prepares to set out commitments to tackle climate change. And as Dan Whitehead reports, the environmentalist is not the only one at the summit pushing for action.
On the summit's final day, it is the oceans and climate taking the spotlight.
We've got to pick up a few more people here now anyway.
In Falmouth, a flotilla of campaigners took to the seas, calling on leaders to take action.
Two of the major ones that would be an incredible start would be actually, banning heavy fuel oil, but if they're not going to ban it, at least tax it. The other big thing that would be wonderful would be banning bottom trawling. The carbon emissions just from bottom trawling, one subsection of fishing, is greater than global aviation.
The demands come as G7 leaders announce a new finance deal to tackle international climate challenges in some of the world's poorest countries.
The scheme aims to give developing nations faster access to cash for things like renewable energy projects. But there are also some big announcements from the G7 on how to better protect our oceans.
The UK government has announced a £500 million fund to protect marine biodiversity in countries like Ghana, Indonesia and Pacific Island states. The announcements on climate action come after 2 days of protests in Cornwall, and there is scepticism about any commitments these leaders make.
The steps that we need now in our climate crisis are so big that anything that they come up with, we're just not optimistic.
Often in summits, they like to produce big statements, don't they, and grand ideas, but whether they'll actually keep to them, I don't know.
I'm here because I want it to be so that when he's 20, he doesn't need to be here because something's been done.
Those pushing governments for action say big promises need big investment.
We absolutely welcome the initiative, although it really needs to come with hard financial commitments. We keep seeing again and again promises being made, like the 100 billion goal for developing countries to act on climate change, and there's just still not enough finance to deliver that.
The climate change message has dominated protests this weekend. As the G7 summit draws to a close, the message they're projecting is loud and clear. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Falmouth, Cornwall.
Well, tensions over post-Brexit trading arrangements in Northern Ireland have played out at the G7 summit. The Prime Minister telling Sky News yesterday that EU leaders need to get it into their heads that Northern Ireland is part of the UK. But there is hope amongst some that an intervention from President Biden could provide a way forward. The Irish Prime Minister says a veterinary-type agreement with the EU called an SPS could eliminate up to 80% of checks on goods. He's been talking to our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins.
I think we need to move beyond where we are. I think from my understanding of a lot of the technical issues that have been discussed, progress can be made on quite a lot of the issues. I believe the US administration's comments last week, which were released, are interesting as well, insofar as they deal with a significant issue that would concern the British government, i.e. the capacity to do a trade deal with the United States, whilst also having an SPS arrangement between the European Union and the United Kingdom. And in my view, there's a legitimate issue there for the United Kingdom government, but in our view, an SPS agreement would deal with up to 80% of all of these issues. And I think it's a prize worth certainly exploring in the fullest manner possible.
To what extent do you understand the US administration chastised the British government for the perceived threat, at least, to the peace process? And do you believe President Biden perhaps has a further role to play in helping to broker a solution?
I wouldn't see it as a chastisement or anything like that. I think the US president is very clear on restoring the transatlantic relationship between America and the European Union and America and the United Kingdom. He's also then, of course, as we know, absolutely committed to the Good Friday Agreement, the full working of the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement. And he doesn't want discussions around the protocol to undermine the Good Friday Agreement. And he also wants to see full engagement. And he believes there's a way and a route, as I do, to getting these issues resolved.
Time is not on your side now. If there is no deal by the 1st of July and the British government unilaterally for a third time extends the grace period, this time for chilled meats, to avoid this so-called sausage war, what way would you expect the EU to respond to that?
I think it will be very problematic because it's not about sausages per se. It really is about the fact that an agreement had been entered into not too long ago, signed off by the British government with the European Union, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, including the withdrawal agreement and the protocol. And that creates, if there's consistent unilateral deviation from that agreement, that clearly undermines the broader relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom, which is in nobody's interest.
So just to be clear, you believe SPS agreement is now the solution, and would you be hopeful that because President Biden has assured the British government that that wouldn't prevent a trade deal, that they may now consider that seriously?
I think it is a significant part of the solution. I think they should consider it very seriously, and I think it could lead to a breakthrough on this.
Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Rob Powell. I mean, and the implication there, Rob, is that if Boris Johnson wants to resolve this, he may have to consider signing up to more EU rules. Would that even be palatable to him?
Well, I think if you judge Boris Johnson by his words and actions over the last few years, you'd have to say that would be quite unlikely because he's continuously rejected signing the UK up to EU laws in this sort of agri-food area, saying that it wouldn't really mean that we're taking back control of our laws. I think when you combine that with the stormy rhetoric that we've had around Northern Ireland with the EU at this G7 summit, that maybe makes you think that a compromise is less likely. Many newspapers reporting that Emmanuel Macron, the French president, yesterday in his bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister, somewhat frustrated Downing Street by suggesting that Northern Ireland wasn't really a proper part of the United Kingdom. I think two big things have changed, though, compared to when Boris Johnson signed that Brexit withdrawal agreement in 2019. The first, and this is what Micheál Martin was getting at in that interview there, is the man in the White House. Joe Biden is a lot more sympathetic to the EU than his predecessor, to put it mildly, and would be a lot more accommodating of these sorts of requirements and EU rules in the UK when it came to a US-UK trade deal. And I think the other factor as well is that Boris Johnson is in a different position politically here in Westminster than he was in 2019. He has a big majority. Brexit is less of a high-profile issue. It's considered more of a closed issue now around these parts. So if he did make this big compromise, and it would be a very big compromise by signing up to these rules, he may well face less fire and fury from his backbenchers.
Well, let's just return to our top story this morning and the Prime Minister's very strong hint that the full reopening on June 21st could be delayed. It comes amid growing concern over the spread of the Delta variant, which Public Health England says now makes up more than 90% of new cases in the UK. Well, let's talk to Deepti Gudasani, a clinical epidemiologist and senior lecturer at Queen Mary University of London Hospital. Good to see you this morning. Look, let's get a straight answer to begin with. Should we be reopening on June the 21st or not?
No. I mean, there's been a scientific consensus on this that has been very clear for weeks. Even before stage 3 reopening, SAGE on May 13th warned that going ahead with stage 3 could lead to a level of hospitalization similar to the January wave if we had a highly transmissible variant. And going ahead with stage 4 would make the whole thing considerably worse. So SAGE, independent SAGE, have been very, very clear for a while. So it's curious to see why the government has treated this as ambiguous and said the data isn't clear and is coming to this decision quite late.
I mean, where does the vaccine play in all of this? I mean, there's what, approaching 30 million people fully vaccinated now. Is that not making significant inroads?
It's certainly going to make a difference. So it's going to weaken the link between cases and hospitalizations. But we need to remember that we have only 42% of our entire population that's been fully vaccinated. And we're dealing with a variant which has a significant level of escape. That means one dose doesn't provide a high level of protection. And two doses, while they provide a high level of protection, that level of protection is still a little bit lower than before. And that means that as we see cases rise exponentially, which they're doubling every 9 days, we're also seeing hospitalizations rise, particularly in the Northwest, where this sort of began earlier. And now we are seeing rises in hospitalizations across England. So while vaccines will weaken that link, unfortunately, they may not be able to prevent a surge that's significant for the NHS and, for the people who are affected.
OK, look, when we talk about these things, we've talked about them a lot, of course, over the last few months. People come out with an argument that say, look, the most vulnerable, the most clinically vulnerable people have been vaccinated. Younger people, particularly school children, are less likely to be badly affected by the virus. Now, do any of these arguments actually matter in terms of what happens with the virus, how it progresses, how it mutates? I mean, can we have any sense of being able to sit back with a degree of confidence?
Well, sadly not, because yes, the most vulnerable have had a high level of protection with vaccination. That protection is still not 100%. We need to remember, for example, that 28% of the deaths with the Delta variant were among people who are fully vaccinated. And that's far lower than they would have been if we didn't have this level of vaccination. But people who've been vaccinated can still die. And younger people, of course, are still vulnerable. And if infected in sufficient numbers, even though their individual risk is low, the number of hospitalizations and deaths can still be quite high. The risk of long COVID is also very significant, given it's very common in young, healthy people who are the group that's being rapidly infected very, very quickly in large numbers right now. We already have 1 million people living with this, and 1 in 5 people will go on and develop persistent symptoms for 5 weeks or more, and we don't know what the long-term consequences are. And the risk of virus adaptation is very, very real. University of Cambridge research showed that the best way to fuel escape mutants was to have high levels of transmission along with vaccination of a vulnerable population. So we have a population that's mixing and transmitting, that's unprotected, alongside a partially protected population that's vulnerable. And, we can't think this is the end of the line in terms of mutations. There's no reason that should be the case. And we need to protect ourselves against this, because it's very possible that these viruses will adapt towards escaping vaccines even more. And the damage that could do to our pandemic response, which is largely based on vaccines, could be huge, because it could take us very much back to square one or even before that. And the only way to prevent virus adaptation is to prevent transmission and control transmission, and also to put in comprehensive controls at our borders to prevent import of new variants, because we have no idea where the next variant will come from.
OK, Dr. Kudasani, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you. It's a bit depressing, isn't it? But realistic nonetheless. OK, let's cheer ourselves up a little bit this morning. Take you outside into the Sky Garden to see what the weather's doing. I wish they'd let me out now. Why won't they let me outside?
I don't know. You need to ask the bosses. But I'm allowed outside. Just to double check that my forecast is correct, and I can tell you there's blue skies above me. It is going to be a widely warm day. All 4 home counties of the UK are likely to see the highest temperature of the year so far.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. So it is going to be warm across most of the UK and Ireland for today, and it stays quite warm, in fact locally hot, over the next few days across some parts of the south. But gradually it will become cloudier and cooler from the north. In fact, across northwestern parts of the UK this morning, northwest Scotland mainly, it is quite cloudy with some spells of rain there, rather windy too. Elsewhere, it's a mild morning, mainly dry and bright, and plenty of sunshine continuing into this afternoon as well. The strong May sunshine is going to get to work. Temperatures are going to rocket up. We're going to see widely highs of the early 20s up to around locally some spots in the southeast 28 to 29 degrees Celsius. If we get higher than 28.3 degrees Celsius, that will make it the highest temperature of the year so far. Also, it will make it the highest ever temperature recorded for the 13th of June. The 13th of June is the only day in the whole of the meteorological summer that has never exceeded a temperature higher than 30 degrees Celsius. But northwest Scotland, cloudy and wet. The same for northwest Ireland and Northern Ireland later.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, with the G7 drawing to an end, President Biden and the First Lady will take tea with the Queen at Windsor Castle this afternoon. It's an honour that goes back many years, with Her Majesty hosting 14 presidents. Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills looks ahead to the meeting today.
They already appear to have hit it off. It was all smiles as the Queen met the Bidens on Friday. But after sharing that time with the other G7 leaders, now they will get their own private moment with the monarch.
By coming to Windsor, the Bidens follow the Trumps, the Obamas, George W. Bush and his wife, and the Reagans. And just like his predecessors, President Biden will be so aware of how important the pictures are going to be when it comes to the overall coverage of his first overseas visit for an audience back home who cannot get enough of the royal family.
Eisenhower was the first she hosted as Queen. In 69 years, she's seen 13 American presidents come and go. Some visits sparking genuine friendships. Others more controversial.
Great woman, great woman.
Democratic strategist Laura Fink believes Her Majesty's 14th president will see this as a huge honour.
How do you think it's likely to play out between President Biden and the Queen?
Well, it was funny because with President Trump, he said it's the best time she's had in 25 years following the event. And so I think that was characteristic of his bombast. I think we're going to do, it's going to be a 180 with President Biden. He is understated. He is someone who connects with people on a deeply personal level. Hello, everyone.
Cementing those shared interests started on Friday. The Duchess of Cambridge and Dr. Jill Biden teaming up for a school visit. And yes, Boris Johnson has certainly put in the hours at the G7 summit. But Lord Darragh, who was the UK's ambassador in Washington during the Trump administration, says nothing compares to the Queen's subtle influence.
There is just an extraordinary fascination, which is very lucky for us. I mean, it's a huge national asset, as I say, and helps greatly, I think. It's part of soft power diplomacy, a big part. Yes, there will be Foreign Office briefing provided for her, and she will read it, and she will get it all, and she will pack it away, and that will be part of the material for her conversation with him. But she's just so experienced at doing this. I'm sure she can manage without the briefing, but she will take the briefing and she will absorb it.
In Cornwall, we saw in spades what a moment with the monarch means. Now, in this historic setting, President Biden will receive a significant diplomatic pat on the back, all conducted over a simple cup of tea. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News, at Windsor Castle.
Now, as leaders met in Cornwall this weekend, there's been a push to help low and middle-income countries vaccinate their populations with pledges of up to 1 billion COVID vaccines to be provided by the G7 to these poorer countries. Well, let's talk to Fergus Drake, who's Chief Executive of Crown Agents, a company helping to distribute COVID vaccines across the world. Good to see you this morning. Now, clearly, getting those vaccines themselves is important. But it's no good just providing a company like you with hundreds of millions of doses, is it? Because presumably the logistics here are particularly difficult.
That's right. These recent vaccine pledges could be the G7's biggest success since its inception in 1975, or its biggest missed opportunity, because what we don't want to see is millions of vaccines going to waste because the infrastructure and the planning hasn't been able to happen on the ground over the next critical few months. It's really important, as you say, to know that a vaccine is only half the story. Every vaccine needs the right syringe. Every syringe needs a fully trained community health worker to administer it. Those health workers need PPE. And above all, there needs to be a willing arm at the end of that chain to receive the vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, look, even on the basics, I know obviously President Biden's pledged, hundreds of millions of doses of the Pfizer vaccine. Now, for a lot of these poorer countries, that's a cold storage problem, isn't it? For a lot of them, even just to store that vaccine for any length of time.
That's right. So there are 4 key issues. The first is that these vaccines need to arrive quickly and they need to have a long shelf life. And also they can't arrive all at once, because if there's millions that arrive in a country like South Sudan, then the infrastructure simply can't cope. And it would be a bit like taking a drink of water through a fire hose. Secondly, that's that cold chain infrastructure that you talked about. Pfizer needs to be passed on at kind of -70 to -80 degrees. And so when it arrives in country, it needs to go from a capital city to a regional centre to local primary healthcare units, and it needs to stay within that cold chain. Finally, you need the health workers. They need to have training, but they also need the specific medical equipment. So not only personal protective equipment, but the Pfizer vaccine has its own syringe, and they have been in short supply over the last few months. And then, a bit like the UK, you need pro-vaccine messages. You need to use social media. You need to use local opinion formers like we did so successfully over the last year to ensure that many people are turning up at these primary healthcare units to take these jabs when they arrive.
So when you outline it like that, it does seem to be actually a huge, astronomical problem in terms of how to get these jabs out, and say, never mind getting the arms to put them in, the willing arms to put them in. How long a process is this going to be? We're not just going to be able to get this out in the next 12 months, are we?
Well, it is going to take some time, but there is a window of opportunity now. If we get the funding right, we can have everyone standing by. So I like to use the analogy of a Formula One pit stop. When you've got everyone trained, a car arrives, it can be refueled and all 4 tyres changed in under 3 seconds. That's what we need to happen. When these vaccines arrive on ground, people like the Ministry of Health, national governments, organisations like Gavi, UNICEF, ourselves, faith-based organisations, charities need to be standing by to ensure that we have one overall cold chain, we have the right people who've been trained up, and then we can really crack on with getting this done over the next 12, 18 months.
I mean, are you confident that can happen, Fergus?
I think it's going to be an absolutely unprecedented feat, but I am optimistic with the pledges that have happened, but the pledges aren't enough. There needs to be the funding that sits around that. There needs to be organisations with specific skills who are working alongside the global organisations to ensure that we don't get any countries left behind, because my overall concern is that COVID could become the next residual pandemic. So what I mean by that is HIV/AIDS still kills over 700,000 people every year. But we don't talk about that in Western societies. The kind of narrative has moved on. We can't have that becoming the overall endpoint of COVID going forward.
Yeah, look, it's really good to talk to you this morning, Fergus. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
OK, time to have a look at the papers for you this morning with the Press Association's political correspondent Jerry Scott and Patrick Winter, The Guardian's diplomatic editor. Good to see you both once again. Let's start with the Sunday Mirror, Jerry, should we? With the Prime Minister seems adding fuel to the fire with this EU row.
Yes, neither side seem to be backing down, do they, on this intensifying row over the Northern Ireland protocol. And, you know, the Prime Minister has said that really he's not going to hesitate in triggering what's known as Article 16, which is really seen as the nuclear option. We saw the EU use it in January, I believe it was, over vaccines. But it basically means that either side can decide to kind of suspend or rip up the agreement that is in place over the border. And, you know, this is really coming to a head now because restrictions are due to kind of end, or the grace period is due to end at the end of this month. We don't really know what's going to happen. The trust is completely broken down between the two sides, and neither side seem to want to budge. There's a big row about how purist to be about the enforcement of the Northern Ireland Protocol, and it just really seems like there is going to be a ratcheting up of tensions until it finally blows. There was quite an interesting anecdote in one of the papers about Boris Johnson saying that he'd had to kind of prove or explain to some of the EU leaders that Northern Ireland and Britain were in the same country. That wasn't quite understood. So it seems like there's still a way to go until we get to agreement.
Yeah, it would seem so. Sunday Telegraph, Patrick, looking at China and the Uyghur Muslims who, I mean, over here we hear about periodically, but we're not fully aware, really, are we, of just the scale of what's going on?
Exactly. I mean, this is a really impressive piece of on-the-ground reporting in the Telegraph. I think they say it's part of a 4-day investigation, and their reporter, I think her name's Sophia Young, had been up in the province for 9 days, I think, with another group of reporters. And it's a very tough piece of work trying to break into a surveillance state like this one. And I think it's she gives a very good, vivid picture of the sense of fear and the sense of state control in this province, and also the way in which so many Uyghur Muslim mosques have been destroyed. There's one story about one very large mosque that's been torn down. It's actually beginning to be replaced by a Hilton hotel. And the way in which a whole culture is being gradually wiped out. But the good twist in her report is the way in which the Chinese state is trying to soften some of the most repressive measures. And that, she says, is a sign that the Chinese government are very confident that they've brought what they regard as rebellion under control. This is all very germane to here at the G7 in Cornwall, because they're discussing what to do about China, and Joe Biden's pressing that the communique is a lot more about forced labour in Xinjiang. So it's all, this is goes to the mill, but it's a very good piece of reporting.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. That follows on to the Sunday Express, Jerry, somewhat, doesn't it? With the idea, Boris Johnson seems to think that you know, the West is back after the G7 summit and providing a suitable opposition, at least, to the power surge that China is.
There does seem to want to be this united front, doesn't there? As Patrick says, this is being discussed at the G7, both on the slave labour side of things, the origins of coronavirus as well, but also the kind of global infrastructure spend. The G7 countries are likely to say, you know, that they all back this Build Back Better for the World scheme that Boris Johnson has kind of spearheaded, including, you know, railways in Africa and wind farms in Asia and things like that. And that is a direct in competition to China's own global infrastructure development plans, which, of course, we know provides them with influence. What will be interesting to see is just how strong these joint statements are. It does seem like, you know, President Biden's very keen to be very strong on this. The EU leaders maybe not so much. So what that final statement, what that final communique looks like, I think is going to be very interesting. But it does seem like there's a united front here. And as you say, Boris Johnson is very keen to stress that the West and liberal democracies are up for the fight.
Do you know what? It's been a weekend of some very heavy and very serious news. So should we lighten things up a bit? Because you know what people like, you two? They like a dog story. I know we've got a couple for you. Patrick, let's have a look at yours in The Sun on Sunday, looking at our favourite dog owner, Her Majesty the Queen, seems to have got herself a new corgi.
Yes, I have to admit, this isn't my specialist area, but I did enjoy the story because I have, as I've become more advanced in years, become an ever greater admirer of the Queen. And she's been tremendous down here at the G7, and to come down at all. And I think she still has the kind of star quality, and what her longevity is just astonishing. But anyway, this is just a story about, apparently her previous corgi was quite young, called Fergus, has died, and now other members of the royal family have given her a new puppy, and there's a nice little headline, one mum and her dog.
It's a great headline.
And, I suppose it's mum's best friend and all that. The issue in the story, not there is an issue in the story really, is what it should be called. And they haven't given it a name yet, and I was wondering whether Meghan would be a nice name.
Oh,
Lilith,
controversial.
like
Controversial. I knew you were going to say that. Yeah, you're a sneaky troublemaker, Patrick, really. Jerry, let's have a look at the Sunday Times, because the High Street is going to welcome dog owners to try and boost trade, and that's a sensible move, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. You know, like Her Majesty, lots of people have had new puppies during lockdown. We've seen them all over social media, haven't we? So a lot of people have got dogs now. We know that people are very concerned about dog nappings. They want to take their pets into shops. Also, I feel like when you go abroad, you see people able to take their dogs absolutely everywhere. And it's always been crazy to me that we've been so anti-dog in so many ways. So, yes, I mean, shops are obviously keen to get people back in after the pandemic too. So
it's a really great, really sensible move, I think.